A teenager hiding secret stashes of something from their family, only to be eventually found out, is not exactly a unique story. But for Michigan's David Hahn, it was quite different than the usual young kid is found with cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, or porno mags. Because in 1994, it would be local authorities who would discover Hahn's stash. It would be the Environmental Protection Agency who would have to come clean it up. And the entire ordeal would lead to an eventual book and documentary about Hahn, the titles of which would widely come to be known as his nicknames, the Radioactive Boy Scout or the Nuclear Boy Scout. Why all this hubbub? Well, you see, the teenage David Hahn was attempting to build no less than a nuclear reactor in his family's backyard shed. As a young boy, Hahn was fascinated by chemistry, and on numerous occasions accidentally caused small explosions with his amateur chemistry experiments. After joining the Boy Scouts, he received a merit badge in atomic energy, at which point he became increasingly interested in the idea of building his own nuclear breeder reactor. Collecting small amounts of radioactive material from household items such as smoke detectors and clocks, Hahn began secretly assembling his reactor in the family's backyard shed throughout his teenage years. His dream of finishing the reactor would never come to be, as he eventually grew concerned over the levels of radiation his work in progress was generating, and began to take down the experiment. But then, during a traffic stop, police discovered troubling materials in the young man's car, which triggered an investigation that ultimately brought the FBI and Nuclear Regulatory Commission to his doorstep. The EPA designated his home a Superfund hazardous materials cleanup site, and proceeded to dismantle the shed and its contents, and bury it all in a disposal site in Utah. Hahn was not necessarily punished for his actions. In fact, he earned Eagle Scout shortly after all of this. But while he never consented to an EPA medical examination, scientists from the organization theorized his overall life expectancy might have been shortened due to his prolonged exposure to radioactive materials. Following the scandal, and the suicide of his mother, Hahn would fall into depression. He regularly skipped classes at Macomb Community College before enlisting in the military, spending time in both the Navy, where he was stationed on the nuclear-powered USS Enterprise, and the Marines. In 2003, Hahn reenacted some of his attempted reactor-building methods for the BBC documentary produced about him. But then, in 2007, the FBI received a lead regarding Hahn possibly possessing a second neutron source in his freezer. During their investigation, an unnamed associate of Hahn's told the FBI that Hahn had not only been collecting radium, but had also been frequently abusing cocaine, not taking his medicine he had been prescribed following a paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis, and in fact was vocally paranoid about people he believed had the power to shock his genitals with their mind. Eventually, the investigation led to Hahn being arrested for larceny, for removing several smoke detectors in the apartment building in which he lived, for the purpose of, yes, obtaining the radioactive material within them. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail, though his sentence was delayed so that he could first undergo psychiatric treatment. In September of 2016, at the age of 39, David Hahn passed away in his hometown of Shelby Township, Michigan, from what was ruled accidental lethal intoxication of alcohol, diphenhydramine, and fentanyl. And while Hahn was involved in no more scandals between his 2007 arrest and the time of his death, one does wonder if, in 2011, he went to the theater and saw a movie in which, according to the film's director, the story's villain was actually based on Hahn and his notorious backyard exploits of his youth. The year is 2011, and Summit Entertainment are about to release a film that will be successful enough to raise the question of whether it could possibly be the next big sci-fi action thriller franchise, with Source Code.
10, Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, who'd happily relive the final 8 minutes of my life over and over again if it meant I'd get to hang out with Michelle Monaghan and Vera Farmiga every single time. Know what I'm saying?
No love for Jeffrey Wright, though.
No, he can watch.
Oh, maybe he's probably into that freak. Well, if you might have, as you might have guessed from Chris's intro there, or probably from seeing the name of the episode, but this is a part 2 of our Jake JULYenhaal special, where we're interrupting Summer Surprise to talk about 2 failed franchise starters for Jake Gyllenhaal. And in this episode, we're talking about the Jake Gyllenhaal time travel classic. No, not Donnie Darko. That one got a sequel, of course, the beloved S. Darko, which I know everyone has seen and loves. So not Donnie Darko, but his other time travel movie, 2011's Source Code. Chris, you want to tell us a little bit about Source Code?
For sure. It is directed by Duncan Jones. A small factoid, he is David Bowie's son. He directed Moon, then went on to make this movie, and then he ultimately did direct Warcraft, an F2F future film we'll talk about, and the Netflix movie Mute.
Which is in the Mooniverse.
Yes, it is in the Mooniverse. Right, I forgot about that. Yeah. It is written by Ben Ripley, who's most known for punching up horror movies. He wrote Species 3 and 4, and then went on to make the Flatliners remake. The budget of the film is $32 million. Domestically, it made $54.7, and worldwide, this is a solid hit based on 2.5 multiplier. It made $147 million. So this was actually a critical darling as well. I think a lot of people loved it. And it made some money. And so you're probably thinking, hey, Chris, hey, Trev, I listen to your podcast a lot, and you talk about failures. And why are we talking about Source Code? Because seemingly it was great.
Yeah. It's not only that, like we've talked about other movies that did well, but for whatever reason didn't end up getting a franchise. This one might be confusing to people because nothing about Source Code seems to scream franchise starter. It doesn't feel like it was designed that way. And in fact, it wasn't. So this is actually a little bit of a different episode for us, but we thought it was valid because there was an attempt or a thought about a Source Code franchise. It just came after the fact. Mm-hmm. So we haven't done one like this before, but I thought it would be kind of fun to look at that other side of the Hollywood franchise machine, and in particular, like the failed franchise machine, because here's a movie that, by all accounts and purposes, like you said, did very well, was well liked, made money, and so suddenly Hollywood goes, I know you weren't thinking about Source Code 2, but, and then, so we'll get into that, but we can just kind of look at the film as it is, and then I know we want to have this discussion about how this is the other side of Hollywood's obsession with IP and getting sequels out. It's one thing to make a movie, and design it from the ground up to be a franchise starter, but honestly, through the history of cinema, there's been a lot of franchises that were born of singular movies that the makers were never thinking about sequels. And if this had happened, this would have fallen into that realm.
Yeah. Yeah, like nowadays, I mean, we're so inundated with the franchise starter, right? Where we get the post-credit scene. We get Nick Fury showing up at the end. We get, hey, how about next time? We get the Power Sword, which I talked about in our intro episode. It's all about let's intro these characters now, and we'll get to the main event, in 2-3 years from now, to milk the franchise dry, before it even starts. But like Trev's saying, especially the 80s, the 90s, these movies just kind of happened. Movies like, let's just say like Jaws. Jaws is, the original blockbuster. And set the precedent of what a franchise, could, be. Same with like Die Hard, Home Alone. Home Alone is notorious for knowing, hey, that was such a big success. Let's just do that again, and make it in a different locale. So it almost felt like there was a lot of that going on in Hollywood. Is that, hey, what worked with Die Hard? Oh, John McClane in a building. Well, you know what? Let's put John McClane in an airport now. It just felt like that was going on, especially in Hollywood. Not a lot of planning, mostly a lot of, hey, let's churn them out. Let's repeat what worked. Let's, maybe touch up the formula a bit, but ultimately the bones of the franchise are the exact same movie over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, Jaws being a great example, because how much can you do? And that speaks to like the fact that you said how Jaws set the template for what a franchise could be, but let's not forget the one person who definitely thought Jaws shouldn't be a franchise was Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
He turned down the offer to direct Jaws 2. He's been quite vocal about it. He doesn't think there should have been any sequels. That didn't stop them from making 3 more,
Yeah.
And I don't know where you fall, Chris. I actually really like Jaws 2. 3 and 4, not so much. 4 is a great bad movie, but that's kind of true of a lot of these franchises. I just jotted down, I know you and I were both looking at some lists about this. I was jotting down some franchises that were born of movies that were definitely not intended to start franchises. And you've already talked about some of the successful ones. I would throw Die Hard into there. I like every Die Hard except for the last one. But I think that, they were very clever at after the second film kind of dropping the John McClane just in a building thing and expanding what Die Hard could be a little bit. Terminator, another one that kind of went off the rails, but you can't dispute how amazing Terminator 2 was, so it's a good thing that they decided to follow along with that. Home Alone, again, another one where Home Alone 2 is awesome.
Yeah.
Everything after, whatever, but they just won't stop, right? They're still making Home Alone movies today. Karate Kid, that was definitely not meant to be a franchise, but here we are today with like maybe the best version of it going with Cobra Kai. But then, like I said, there are some ones that are less successful. Your Ghostbusters. What a world it would be if they had just left Ghostbusters alone and we just had that one great Ghostbusters movie.
Oh, I know.
The Exorcist.
Don't get me started on Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Now I love Exorcist 3, but overall that franchise is a very confused, haphazard franchise because how do you sequelize that movie? Speed 2, Cruise Control. Enough said. Caddyshack and
don't just not talk about Willem Dafoe in a tub with a bunch of leeches. Okay,
leeches on him. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's actually the only interesting thing about that movie, of course.
It is.
And then like Caddyshack is another one where it's just like, why did they make a Caddyshack 2? And the other successful one I didn't mention. To me, this might be like this must be the best example of this. Actually, I wonder if you'll agree. Of all of these, because we talked about like Die Hard, they had to change the formula, and eventually we got Die Hard 5, which is bad. Terminator, there's more bad Terminator movies than good ones. Mm-hmm. But you know what might be the best example of a movie that definitely should not have ever had a sequel, and yet they made a really good franchise of it, is Rambo.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I guess maybe even Rocky. I don't think he was thinking about Rocky sequels. So like Stallone kind of figured out a way to keep his characters going, and like build beyond what the first movie was.
I thought you were gonna say Look Who's Talking. Which I like those movies. I think those movies are fun as a kid.
I saw them as a kid and enjoyed them, but I'm trying to remember if I saw the third one, The Animals Talk. Is that the thing?
The Dogs Talk, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever saw that one.
They get trapped in a cabin with a snowstorm when like the parents leave, so like they're trying to get back, and it's this whole thing, and it's
Do they have to fight the mob at all? This is the thing. I can't remember if you and I have talked about this, but like it's wild how many like 80s and 90s comedies they come up with like this like singular concept, and like that's not enough to hold through the whole film. So they always throw in like a mob subplot.
Yeah.
Where like the and that's like in so many comedies. And then just this year, watched a movie that for the most part I'm enjoying called Renfield, because I'm really liking the Renfield Dracula of it all. And then suddenly there's a mob subplot. And I'm like, oh my God, they're trying to bring this back? No.
Yeah.
Like that's
I think you're confusing Look Who's Talking 3 with Home Alone 3. Because Home Alone 3, they're like expert level like gadgetry thieves and stuff. They're not just like burglars, but they have like technology and stuff. Is
it Home Alone 4 where like Marv comes back, but he's played by French Stewart instead of
Yes it is. Yes it is. So yeah, that's what we're getting at, listeners. We're telling you that source code matters for our podcast number 1, not just to complete the great pun of our theme month, but it is interesting to think about franchises that just happened.
That happened more organically, right? When you say the most recent, like to me, the most recent obvious example is John Wick.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like well, I'm actually. So sorry, I was just gonna say I'm actually rewatching those movies right now with my girlfriend. She's never seen them, so I've been very, very aware of it because I haven't seen them. I've never watched them like right after another, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that first one really does not lead itself to more. It's very, very interesting, and then how they expand the universe and the rules and everything is quite something. It does become like full-fledged cartoon. Which is like fine because it's awesome, and in my opinion, the fourth is the best. So they know what they're doing, and it became like this really cool thing that you get to unwrap every single entry. But that first one, it ends.
Yeah,
it ends.
No, that's the thing. There's a lot of franchises I enjoy that they could have just stopped at the first one. I think of like we did an episode on Saw in our Success to Series. And that's another one where, we even talked in that episode about how they had to kind of reverse engineer another script into Saw 2.
Yeah.
Because they were not thinking about a sequel. Now, obviously, with like horror films, that's the thing about, I agree with you that John Wick the first one's pretty singular. I'd say that was Saw. But those are examples of movies that there might have been an inkling in the back of like the screenwriters' minds that, there is potential for more here. We're not going to say it's a franchise, but there's potential. Source Code, I think, is the more interesting example of, here's a movie where I don't think Ben Ripley was thinking about a sequel at all, nor do I think any of the filmmakers involved at the time, because it doesn't, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it at the end and whether it feels like it's setting anything up. But I think they really believed they were making just a singular sci-fi action movie. And then because it was successful, because people liked it, they saw the potential to like wring money out of it. It's the kind of thing where if it had been like a 90s movie or like a late 80s movie, I could have seen them going right into like straight to video sequels to this. That's what happened a lot. There's a lot of successful movies that got, The Substitute and Universal Soldier, where right away they went into like DTV sequels. Tremors being another one, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue to Ben Ripley. I think he's he's kind of like the main guy to talk about this episode. I know it's Jake Gyllenhaal, and we will talk about Jake Gyllenhaal, him proper. We did talk in Prince of Persia in detail about his career, by the way.
Yeah.
So if you're new to this episode and you want to listen a little bit more about Jake Gyllenhaal, go listen to that one. It's a good conversation. But Ben Ripley is the writer of this film, and it's funny because he did not want to write this movie. He had a meeting with Universal. He wrote a spec script. It was actually on the blacklist, a list in Hollywood of scripts with a lot of potential that might be maybe a little bit too ballsy to make, maybe, or like it has a lot of, they're almost too ambitious, or they don't exactly know how to attack them. But usually they're like really good scripts. Like it's not like where scripts go to die and they suck. You know what I mean?
Like the entire purpose of the blacklist is to try and draw attention to these scripts and say, this is what Hollywood should be making, And I think every year, it's like an annual thing. Every year there's about 30 or so. And I'd say, every year about 5 of them actually end up getting made.
Yeah. And that's why like this spec script of his was sitting there and he really was worried it wasn't going to get made. So he has a quote here. "Yeah, it was agony. And I wrote it on spec. I wasn't certain it would ever see the light of day. One thing that kept me going, though, was that I had a suspicion that if I got this right, it could really open a new level for my writing career. At that point, I had spent about 4 years doing studio rewrites on horror movies that were never getting made. I knew that if I showed up with another spec script, I'd have to show up with something very different that took chances, that motivated me to keep going until it seemed right." So ultimately, Ben Ripley says, "I'm writing this movie." What's his name from Universal? What's the producer's name here?
Mark Gordon.
Mark Gordon. So Mark Gordon got wind of this, obviously, and he took the meeting with him, and he had a relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal from doing The Day After Tomorrow. So they start to collaborate together, and then Moon comes out. Trev, you've seen Moon by Duncan Jones, yeah?
Oh, love it. I love
Yes.
Moon. Yeah.
Yes. Moon's fantastic. Moon is an absolutely fantastic film. And Jake Gyllenhaal is absolutely taken with it that he campaigns to get Duncan Jones to make Source Code. Now, Duncan Jones doesn't want to do another sci-fi film right after doing a sci-fi film.
Which is funny because he follows this with a fantasy film and then another sci-fi film.
Yes. And some may say he should have stuck in his lane.
It's funny. You almost hate to say it, but it's like, here's the weird thing where people get typecast for all sorts of bizarre reasons. I honestly think like if you're David Bowie's son and your first movie is like a critically acclaimed sci-fi film, sorry, you just like set your stake in the ground. You're the sci-fi guy.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, okay, he's going to be a great sci-fi director. He's following the David Bowie sci-fi lineage,
Totally. Well, and what attracted David Bowie to the film too was his focus on character, on narrative.
David Bowie.
What'd I say?
You said what attracted David Bowie to the film.
Okay, let me say it again.
Now, don't get me wrong. I would watch Source Code starring David Bowie.
Yeah, for sure. I might keep this in. Okay, so it attracted Duncan Jones. The son of David Bowie, which I'm sure he wants to be known of every single time somebody says his name. He is attracted.
I would, though, to be fair.
That's you know what? There's worse people. You could be
Yeah.
you know, well there's a lot of bad ones you could be you could be related to. Anyways, Duncan Jones wants to make this movie all of a sudden because he does see potential in the character and the narrative versus getting bogged down in the overplot of the time travel mechanic. Because what Ripley's idea is, which is really the cool part to me, is that he comes from a place of, if we did invent time travel, it wouldn't be about going back, you know, to kill Hitler. You know, it would be going back a few hours. You know, especially if we finally just discovered some sort of time travel, we'd be testing it on the short term. You know, going back to yesterday or something like that. So that was very interesting to me, and then also, everybody involved.
It's kind of like it's kind of like the movie Primer, which is like one of the most intelligent movies of time travel ever, but he's making like the more bombastic action version of it.
Totally.
But still sticking to that idea of saying like time travel would probably be a little more I was going to say simple. Primer is the exact opposite of simple. That's a very complicated movie that you need to watch with like charts and, you know, flow charts out and take notes. But, you know, like you said, the idea of you would only be able to go back a little bit, at least at first.
And again, not getting bogged down in the science. So that reminds me of a little movie called Looper. You know, Rian Johnson's film. I think we all, and by we all, I mean maybe film Twitter, you know, we'll just say it that way. But praised that film for having fun with the time travel mechanic and just straight up saying, almost to the audience, hey, don't think about it, okay?
Yep. I just brought that up again recently. I was talking about like time travel movies, and I again said Looper has the best explanation of time travel of any movie, where it just says, don't even bother.
Yeah. You can't make something logical when it is completely illogical. You just can't.
No.
And
especially like how many time travel things have like causality loops and just the way it like breaks your head. Like Terminator is a great example where when I was a kid, just like I love that movie, but man, I would sit there and it would bother me of like, wait, how could he send his own father back? Like that doesn't make any sense. And, like,
or which I used to say, especially after Terminator 3, me and my friends would discuss ad nauseum. What's stopping Terminator 1 from taking place while Terminator 2 is happening, but also what's stopping Terminator 2 from happening while Terminator 3 is happening? You know, it's like, it's just this complete paradoxical loop, and oh no, I've gone cross-eyed. You know, that's how it feels. That's how it feels.
And I guess like the thing for Duncan Jones too is like, I get the idea of being like a little hesitant to rush right into another sci-fi film because it just sounds like he didn't want to get stuck into one genre. But as we were just alluding to, Source Code is a very different kind of sci-fi film than Moon. It's not set on like a space station. It's just on a train. You know, it's like very much It Looks of Our Time. It's a different kind of sci-fi. It's time travel versus, spoiler alert, cloning and space exploration. So, you know, it's not like Source Code feels like it's from the same director, but also doesn't. Does that make sense? You know, it's like, yeah,
it's which we'll talk about soon here, actually. It's dealing with a lot of heady intellectual quantum physics, I would say. Very different. There's a lot more different science fiction theories and techniques that this movie is taking over versus, like Trev said, spoilers, cloning.
And this movie doesn't have Kevin Spacey in it.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, Moon's only his voice, but still, you know.
I forgot about that. He did a few just his voice, eh? Interesting. We should watch it. We should do a Kevin Spacey month and see how many views we get.
We can't though, because Moon has like, I guess you would say Mute is kind of a franchise.
Oh yeah, it is. Well, sorry listeners, you're not going to hear us talk about Kevin Spacey a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Should we?
Until our spin-off podcast, the Spacey Cast.
The Spacey Cast? Where we only talk about that movie with the dog.
I was going to say we only talk about that weird like Christmas video he made after he was canceled, where he played Frank Underwood.
I think there's a podcast out there that they watch the same thing every year and talk about it. We should do that
every week. You mean, yeah.
It's every week they do that?
Yeah, it's called The Worst Idea of All Time or something like that. They were watching like Grown Ups 2 every week.
Oh my God. Do they still do that? Do you know?
They do. I think they do a different movie every year. Yeah.
Okay. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll save that for Spacey Cast. Should we just talk about Source Code?
Yeah, let's get into it. There's not much more to say about the background of it. Let's just talk about the movie itself, and then we can talk about its potential as a franchise starter.
Sean. Hey. I took your advice. It was very good advice. Sean.
Look, I can see that you think you know me, but I don't know who you are. My name is Captain Coulter Stevens.
You're kind of freaking me out.
No.
Talk to me, Sean.
Look, I don't know who Sean is, and I don't know who you are.
Welcome back, Captain Stevens.
Where am I?
You are inside the source code.
What is the source code?
It's a computer program, Captain.
Source code enables you to cross over into another man's identity in the last 8 minutes of his life.
At 7:48 this morning, a bomb exploded on a train outside of Chicago, killing everyone on board. A man named Sean Fentress was on that train. He is now you. Think, Captain, remember back. Who bombed the train?
I don't know who bombed the train.
Then try again.
Wait, no,
So, what do you think?
It's the same train, but it's different.
We've been informed there'll be another attack in 6 hours. If you find the bomber, the next attack can be prevented. Concentrate on the passengers in your car. Look for ones who seem nervous. As always, you will have 8 minutes.
8 minutes, and then I blow up again. What would you do if you knew you had less than 8 minutes to live?
I'd make those seconds count.
I want to go back in. I'm gonna save her.
You can't. Doesn't work that way.
Christina is dead.
She doesn't have to be.
You cannot alter this reality while inside the source code.
I'm asking you to have the decency to let me try. What's going on? He's in trouble. Tell me everything's gonna be okay.
Everything's gonna be okay.
When decorated soldier Captain Coulter Stevens wakes up in the body of an unknown man, he discovers he's part of a mission to find the bomber of a Chicago commuter train. In an assignment unlike anything he's ever known, he learns he's part of a top-secret government experiment called Source Code, a program that enables him to cross over into another man's identity in the last 8 minutes of his life. With a second much larger target threatening to kill millions of people, Coulter needs to now relive the 8-minute interval over and over again, while gathering clues each time until he can solve the mystery of who's behind the bombing and thusly prevent the next attack.
Source code. Chris, why don't you go first? I know you're a big time travel guy. I know time travel is like one of your favorite like fiction conceits just in general.
It really is.
So I'm curious to hear. First of all, I want you I don't really know too much like your history of this movie. Was this a first time watch for you or no? But why don't you tell me like your history and then how you felt this time?
Sure. No, this is my second time seeing it. It's a movie I saw in the theater, so I don't know if it was opening weekend or whatnot. I don't even know why, but I definitely did see it in theaters. And at the time, I really, really loved it. I really loved it back then. For whatever reason, I have not revisited it. It seems like it's one that I would have, but also I've felt that Source Code has kind of been forgotten in a lot of ways. We talked about Prince of Persia kind of not derailing Jake Gyllenhaal's career. That's not what I mean, but I think maybe after the stink of Prince of Persia, yes, lots of people went to go see Source Code and it made money, but actually it wasn't profitable according to Duncan Jones, by the way. I just want to throw that out there.
Good old Hollywood accounting.
Exactly. Talking to you, Indiana Jones 5. Oh my god. Yeah, I think this one is kind of of a forgotten gem, and I still feel the same way. This is an intelligent sci-fi thriller in a post-Inception world. It's kick-ass, it's effective, it's optimistic, and it's really lovely. When we get into spoilers, I'm gonna talk more about that. But for a good time loop movie like a Groundhog Day or something, you really need to entertain me, so I'm not bored of seeing the same scene over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I think this film it asks for your active participation as a viewer. 11 minutes in, the movie's cooking already. And it tells you the conceit, it tells you some of the rules, it tells you 8 minutes, trial and error, pay attention to the details. And it's almost like the movie's telling me, yeah, pay attention to the details. Like let's solve this mystery together with Jake Gyllenhaal. And there's the wishy-washy technobabble that happens, but it's sort of like Looper in the sense of like it does stop to tell you a little bit, but then it's again, forget about it. Because the movie gets to what I love in my sci-fi films the most is it uses technology to expand on emotions, character, and a mystery plot. And this movie got me emotional on a couple occasions. And I think this movie just fucking cooks. Like I love source code. I'm kind of mad at myself. It's taken me, 12 years to revisit it. But I would absolutely put this in my top 10 of 2011. Like I went back to my Letterboxd list today actually, and I made sure to put it in there. And source code to me just rips. So I'm looking forward because we've actually never spoken about source code in our friendship, like at all. So
because like you said, it's a movie. It is kind of a movie that time forgot. It's actually funny, Chris, how similar we are on this. In that I also saw this in the theater, remember really liking it, and then for whatever reason, never watched it again until 2 days ago.
That's so funny.
Same exact thing. And you know what? Like you said that you were kind of mad at yourself for not revisiting it. I'm gonna say I kind of am happy that it took me that long because I honestly forgot a lot about it. So it was kind of nice to be able to sit down and like rewatch it, and a lot of it was very fresh to me. Like I remember that I enjoyed it, but I honestly didn't remember every piece of like how it ended up or everything. Mm-hmm. And something you hit on, and it's what I mostly want to talk about because I don't think we're gonna have like intense disagreements here. I think there might be one slight thing we disagree on, but it's not going to be an argument.
Sure.
It's that I'm not sure. I think some of the logic of the film is not super strong, but what you were kind of hitting on this. This is the kind of time travel movie that does prove that, as you were saying, if you have a strong enough dramatic thrust, if the dramatic conceit is there and the characters are fun, it really allows you to overlook and bypass and let the stuff kind of blow by. Because I think some of the logic of the movie is kind of wonky. And also there's some real ethical concerns going on in this movie too.
Yeah.
And I think that's all very interesting to talk about. And I'm really looking forward to talking about it. But the movie kind of just like goes like, yeah, don't worry about that. And it actually works because the movie it's so quick, right? I mean, at the beginning of this on the second viewing, because I didn't remember it, I forgot that it was only an 8-minute time loop. And I don't know about you, but I kind of thought to myself, like, man, I remember liking this, but am I really just going to have to watch the same 8 minutes over and over for like 90 minutes? Mm-hmm. And the way they kind of can extend that 8 minutes and have a lot of stuff happen between the time loop scenes, that makes that not so bad. As you said, the characters are all very interesting. And the emotional thrust of like what's happening to Coulter Stevens is so intense and just so well done in the movie that the logical stuff I'm going to talk about and the ethical stuff, it's interesting. It's fun to talk about afterwards, but it doesn't sink the movie at all in the moment. The movie just like when you say it cooks, that's exactly right. This is just like completely propulsive from second one until the end. And you're on board with it, not to make a bad train pun or anything, but never derails. I'll just keep doing it.
Yeah, your excitement explodes with every 8-minute interval. The 8 minutes is cool too because I don't know about you, but I definitely tried to keep track of the real time of the film.
I did too. I think they cheat it pretty bad on the last one.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
But they are pretty damn good. It's about as good as you can get for a movie with such a tight runtime and also with such a tight rule. You know, like you literally, 8 minutes. There's not a lot that can happen in 8 minutes. And especially with all the stuff that Coulter has to get done. But for whatever reason, it just works. The precise editing is so clever. When he's learning things with each loop, you learn with him and your attention is the exact same. So like when that, girl spills coffee on Michelle Monaghan's shoe, you're right there with him being like, oh yeah, the coffee's coming right now. Oh yeah, her phone rings. And there's a moment, about 40 minutes in or so where Jake starts to become frustrated. And I've always loved that in time loop movies too, like Groundhog Day, when the protagonist becomes dejected and they're just like, Okay, yeah. Okay, spill the coffee. Yeah, your phone's gonna ring. Okay, do this. Yeah. And they're just going through the motions. Because yeah, that would be annoying. And I love that you're with Coulter on this journey from start to finish. Like you really, really are, and you're so on board with what he has to do, and you're rooting for him.
Yeah, and can we just get into like the logical stuff right now? Because I think
of course, yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
Because I want to speak about how, like I said, I think the logic is wonky, but at the same time, I also think the movie is pretty intelligent, and I think Ben Ripley is kind of aware of the wonkiness of the logic and almost uses it to his advantage. So let's talk about what the idea of source code is. So source code in the movie is invented by Jeffrey Wright's character. And essentially, he's discovered that when people die, the last 8 minutes of their memories are still accessible. So there's this explosion on a train in Chicago, downtown Chicago, and it kills everybody on the train. And they want to find out who on the train was the bomber. That's what they believe the bomber was on the train because probably part of some terrorist cell or something, because they're now threatening another bomb, a dirty bomb, to go off in downtown Chicago. And so they've discovered that one person on the train has the right brainwaves to match up with Jake Gyllenhaal's soldier character, who is, part of this experiment as he learns and we learn through the course of the movie, where he wakes up in this pod and discovers he's being put into the source code of this passenger, which means he's going into the last 8 minutes of this person's memories. Now, already logical questions are opening up here. You're thinking, the bomb blew up and incinerated everybody. Where are they getting this person's source code from? They don't have a brain from this person. So the movie doesn't even bother to answer that. Fine, I don't care. But I remember when I first saw this movie, one thing I do remember is walking out of the theater and immediately talking to all my friends about how, you know what, the logic of source code does not hold up at all. Because Jeffrey Wright keeps making the point, he keeps telling Jake Gyllenhaal, this isn't time travel. It's not actual time travel. You're not in another reality. You're just in basically someone's memories.
Yeah, time reassignment.
Yes. But within those memories, Jake Gyllenhaal can do new things. He can get off the train. He can go, far away from the train within this time if he can get off. He can go into compartments and places that this Sean Fentress, the person whose mind he's taken over, never did. So that doesn't make sense, really. If you just stop and think about it, logically, how could a person's memories access anything that they didn't see or experience? So right away, again, that's a problem. However, what I realized watching it this time that the movie does that's pretty clever, and I don't know if you picked up on this and if you agree with me, but I think there's actually a moment where Gyllenhaal realizes that Jeffrey Wright is wrong about his own invention. That this is time travel, because there is one time loop in the middle where he actually makes it a little bit past the 8-minute mark. And then it seems like he's going to keep going, and then he kind of falls onto the tracks and gets hit by a train. And that sends him back to the beginning. It's that time he actually went a little bit beyond that time. Which means then Jeffrey Wright has been saying this whole time that's impossible. And the movie never really draws attention to that. But I think Ben Ripley is actually saying that's the moment where Jake Gyllenhaal realizes no. I think actually I'm in time travel here. I think I'm actually going back into another timeline. Is that what you kind of thought too, and how you picked up on it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It was definitely laying the breadcrumbs to the viewer, being hold on, there's way more to this. There's way more going on, and to keep your eyes open. Wait till the real reveals are going to happen.
Yeah. So it's interesting because that's where you get into again, the logic is still bizarre, but it's almost doing that thing. And this is why I say I like the Looper thing. This is where I'm fine with it. I don't need the answers to how it works, because I guess the movie's even saying here that Jeffrey Wright has invented something that he doesn't even understand the power of, and he doesn't even get exactly what it can accomplish. And whether it's mystical at that point, or whether the science is just more advanced than even Jeffrey Wright understands somehow, I don't care. All that matters is it sets up the story and allows the Coulter Stevens character to have a new mission and to think about how he can actually change things as opposed to just find out information. So I don't really need the answers. That's fine.
Well, that brings up another ethical dilemma, right?
Yes.
So we're talking...
Now, this is where it gets a little more tricky.
Yes, and this is actually... I didn't think about this at all back in 2011. This is now on this viewing, and actually probably about a day later, I thought about it. Because I was coming off the high of watching something that totally passes the dread test, in my opinion. And I'm like, wait a second. And we'll get to the reveal later, but first, he's being transported into another man's body, okay, another man's brain, but he looks like the other man. To everybody there in that timeline, he looks like the OG guy, But we're only seeing Jake Gyllenhaal because that's how that's the visual language of the film. That's for our, that's for.
But whenever he looks
us.
in a mirror or you see his reflection in glass, it's the other guy.
Exactly. So if he does at that moment, when the narrative gets triggered for us to realize something is going on, especially Jake Gyllenhaal, when he escapes the explosion the first time and he's still alive, but he's still Jake Gyllenhaal, all of a sudden you're like, wait a second. Has this man taken over another man's body?
Yes.
And for how long is he going to be this man? Is he going to be this man forever now? What about that other guy's, what about that guy's family and friends? Because Jake Gyllenhaal's Coulter Stevens does not have the memories of the man that he's been, put into. So, I mean, let's hope this guy is a drifter.
Well, so we know he's not. We know he's a teacher, and I was thinking, like, does this mean like Coulter Stevens has to go report to like his classroom on Monday and be like, all right, I'm here to teach you guys English, I guess. And he like doesn't know what he's doing, And like you said,
exactly.
the whole thing with the guy's family. Exact same thing, Chris. Where I watched the movie. That doesn't even occur to you while you watch the movie, and that's because the movie's very, very effective at just clipping you along and like being very exciting, and you're rooting for him, and because of what he's going through, you like want him to be able to survive this. And it's only after the fact that you think, oh wait, but him surviving that means he has essentially killed this man for all intents and purposes. And
totally.
You know what movie came to mind was this is Wonder Woman 84.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? What's Chris Pine's character's name again?
Steve Trevor.
Yeah, Steve Trevor. Steve Trevor, walks around in another man's body basically, and then Wonder Woman rapes this man, this shell of his former self because he looks like Chris Pine. It's a very strange narrative decision, but in a movie like that, which sucked a bag of dicks, that movie was so bad, that you get bogged down by it, so you start to think about it, right? So in that movie, it ruins the film because nothing in that movie's working. Something about Source Code is that, it took me to, I think I was like the next day and I was like going to bed. When you're sitting in bed, you're kind of like looking into the ceiling for a bit and just the last remnants of the day. And I'm just like, I sat up there, I'm like, yes, going to sleep. And then, hold on, did Jake Gyllenhaal kill that guy?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, it's funny because when I was watching it this time, the whole mystery of the film is he's told, you have 8 minutes to find out who on the train is the bomber. So we keep watching him do that. We keep seeing him interrogate different passengers and accuse different people. And my girlfriend multiple times said, oh, it's going to be him. The bomber's going to be the guy whose body he's in. And I at least remembered enough to know that wasn't the case. So I didn't tell her that, but I'm thinking to myself, no, that's not the case. But then afterwards, when I started to think about what we were talking about, I'm like, you know what? Honestly, that would have been the better, if you wanted to like not have this ethical conundrum at the end, that's what you would have done. Because it would have been
except
like,
you're watching the bomber the whole time. Right?
But I mean, at least at the end, if he takes somebody's life over, you're just like, oh, he's just taking over this loner bomber. Who cares? But instead, you are left with, oh, he's trying to take over the life of this man,
of Sean,
and use
whatever.
it and use it to like just bag Michelle Monaghan.
Yeah. Does he he doesn't remember where Sean lives? Like, how does he get home? How
he does have his license on him, so he's
right.
He's
Okay,
got the
that's
address.
fair.
Yeah.
Does he know his alarm code?
Probably not. No, he doesn't know anything about him.
Yeah,
that's
it's a real conundrum.
The movie ends at just the right moment before it has to get into those questions. That's the thing,
Totally.
And like I said, it's fine. Like though it's the kind of thing where it could bother you, or you could just be like us and think it's kind of a funny thing to talk about afterwards. But but let the movie work in the moment, because the story the movie is telling you is more about the journey of Coulter Stevens trying to get through this experience and live another day.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've mentioned her a couple times now. Can we talk about the two ladies, the two actresses who are two of my absolute favorite actresses in Hollywood for the last probably 15-ish years. Not my favorites, but in the list of my favorites. I absolutely love Michelle Monaghan and Vera Farmiga. Those two are completely captivating on every level, and they're the perfect talent, the perfect stunning talents to be what you need for this film. Michelle Monaghan is absolutely the love interest that you would fall for and also want to save the world for. And then Vera Farmiga is the perfect captivating presence to be the woman in the chair. You know, like it really, they're so perfect for these roles. And I love how the narrative plays out, that again, it keeps going back to character. You know, Vera Farmiga, she plays Colleen Goodwin, who is kind of the military personnel that's speaking to Jake while he's in the experience. Oh, speaking of Coulter, sorry. You know what? Screw it. I'm just going to say Jake. Is that fine?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's easier to say than Coulter. Respectfully, Ben Ripley. But Colleen is the military personnel that talks to Jake while he's in the experiment and kind of leads him through. And then when Jake is out of the experiment, every 8 minutes, she's like the commanding officer that is like, what'd you learn? What'd you find out? What are you doing? Okay, you got to go back in. And throughout his journey of like questioning what's going on, where am I? Because visually we see him strapped into this like really claustrophobic, weird sci-fi cube, you know? And he's got like a video screen that he can see Colleen Goodwin, and it's cold in there, and there's things leaking out the sides, and we don't exactly know where he is. And she kind of is there to center him again, to get him focused. And it's a great interplay, especially when they're seemingly getting nowhere, and then Jeffrey Wright has to show up and take the reins, and he's very callous, very manipulative. It's a great dichotomy versus the tact of Vera Farmiga's character. So you start to, again, sympathize with the characters, right? Even more so. You know, Jeffrey Wright's tact is almost a necessary evil to get Jake back on track. But it's amazing how Vera Farmiga's performance is so... She draws you in, and you trust her, you know?
Well,
and
her performance...
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just repeating myself. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say her performance and her arc is like the proof that this movie is like way more intelligent than it probably even had to be.
Yes.
Because it would be very, very easy for that character to just be the person in the chair. But instead, we get a full arc, and this is why you get an actor of Vera Farmiga's caliber. So just to echo what you just said, I love Vera Farmiga. She's one of my biggest Hollywood crushes.
Yep.
And I just think she's also just so captivating on screen. And here you get to see like the full range of her talents, because she starts and she's kind of like just very harsh and no nonsense, and we have to stick to the mission, you know, and she's just kind of almost robotic in how she is dealing with Jake Gyllenhaal. And then as she starts to get to know him a little bit more and sympathize with his plight, you actually get to have a full character arc of her as well, and see her give new layers to her character and become a much more likable and fun character. And so that's, you know, the movie could have just had her be the same thing all the way throughout.
Yeah.
But instead it allows her to build up. And then with Michelle Monaghan, who I think is one of the most underutilized actresses in Hollywood for the last 10 years or so, or more, honestly. What a tough role, because as you alluded to, you have to find an actress who is so likable that you believe someone would fall in love with them in just 8 minutes.
Yeah.
and or even less than that, honestly. And I think it's like only in like the second or third time loop where he comes and sits back down and he says to her, he's like, you know, you're nice. You're nice. And he's already starting to like think, I want to protect this person. And you buy it because you're like, yeah, there's just something when she like, he would come, you know, when he first wakes up on the train and she's just smiling at him, you just fall in love right there on the spot. And just and she's talking about how she's just recently broken up with her like shitty boyfriend, but she's like so kind of like, she's not like dour about it. Instead, she's kind of like really taking like the looking at the positive side of it. And you do just instantly fall in love with her. And yeah, she's like the perfect choice for this, because it would have been very easy to, you know, get that part wrong, I think.
Big time.
And then because you mentioned them, I'll also just throw out, I realized while watching this movie, it just kind of occurred to me finally, like, I don't talk about how I think Jeffrey Wright is like one of my favorite actors. Mm-hmm. You know, I just like people don't talk about him enough. I mean, I get it. I mean, he's very well respected. I'm not saying he's not, you know, well respected. He's not getting roles, but man, he's like really one of like the heavy hitters in Hollywood nowadays. You know, he's just got this like gravitas that's like perfect. You know, I loved him as Gordon in the Batman. Thought he was great on Westworld. I love him in the Wes Anderson movies he's been in recently. And then yeah, he's perfect in this because he's the asshole, right? He's the guy you're not supposed to like. But as you said, you understand it. It's just coming to like from him. It's just about practicality. He's only an asshole because he was really trying to find out who set this bomb off.
Yeah.
He's really he's trying to do the right thing, even if he's trying to do it for slightly capitalistic reasons. Like he wants to prove his experiment works. But he's never entirely wrong in what he's saying.
No,
when he's telling Jake Gyllenhaal, "Hey, get back on the mission," he's right.
Well, yeah, he's not an evil mustache twirling scientist. He's doing his job, but yeah, for all the right reasons. Millions of people are going to die if Jake doesn't pull this off. So, he's unnecessary evil, as I said before. You also forgot to mention Jeffrey Wright as Felix in all the Daniel Craig Bond films. He's such a great presence when he shows up in those films. I remember even watching Casino Royale and being like, man, like that guy's great. Like all my friends are like, oh man, is Felix our favorite character? Like right away, he just draws you in. That voice, the way he looks, kind of like how he kind of tilts his head down, and you kind of he looks above his glasses a little bit, especially as Gordon in the Batman. He's great. I'm a huge fan of Jeffrey Wright. I know
I'll just say he has maybe my favorite scene in Asteroid City. It involves him giving a speech, and it's so incredible.
Two things I do want to mention, because I want to jump into spoilers right away now, because I think it's now I have to speak about other things I liked. But one thing I really want to talk about is actually, you know what? It's been a while. I want to have a score whore right now, Trev. This movie was supposed to be scored by the great Clint Mansell, who did Requiem for a Dream, basically all of Aronofsky's films for the most part. But he had to drop out just due to scheduling. And we got this guy I've never heard of. His name is Chris Bacon. First of all, great name for multiple reasons.
Do you hope if his last name starts with P, his name would be Crispy Bacon? We can only hope. We can only hope. I don't
even want to confirm that because it just needs to live as my truth. But his score, see if I'm right about this, if I'm going to make the right comparison. If I'm not, get mad at me. But I think it is very playful, mysterious, but also big and bombastic because of its use of violin and strings. It keeps the pace heightened of the film. And I threw this in my notes. I called it very Hitchcockian. I'm right in saying that, yeah?
Well, I think it doesn't. I know what you mean in that, and this is sometimes when people use that term Hitchcockian. I think this is kind of what they're getting to.
Yes.
It doesn't honestly sound like a score that would be in a Hitchcock movie, but I get what you mean that it's trying to create the same kind of feelings as like what a Hitchcock movie does, and what a Bernard Herrmann score would be doing in a Hitchcock movie. So yes. Yeah, I get what you mean. It's a score that's being used to increase your tension to almost unbearable degrees. Yeah, no,
and like the total opposite of like a Zimmer score. It's bombastic, but in this like really playful sense. Like it's the heartbeat of this film in a lot of ways, and it kicks in when it really needs to shock you back into, oh my god, we only have 8 minutes to go. You know what I mean? Like, and it's very very effective. And Crispy Bacon, I hope he keeps it going. I gotta look into his filmography. The second thing before spoilers, you must have loved your favorite comedian. Trev's favorite comedian, actually, everyone, is don't pretend you don't love him, okay? Because
there's a weak spot in this movie.
Well, okay, one of the passengers on the train, we'll just get this out now, is Trev's great Russell Peters.
Somebody gonna get hurt real bad. Somebody.
In 2011, this makes a lot of sense why he would be the comedian playing kind of a de facto version of himself on this train. But he's not a great actor, number one.
He's not a great comedian.
Yeah, he's not great. He's not great.
Yeah, no, this was the time, because you're right, like in 2011, people, I don't know, this is almost, it feels like it is almost forgotten, but there was a time where he was like the biggest stand-up in the world.
Oh, yes.
And it drove me insane, because I think this guy is so indicative of like the worst kind of comedy, where it's just all bad racial, ethnicity stereotypes, and him doing voices, be like, here's what black people are like, here's what Arab people are like, here's what Indian people are like, here's what Chinese people are like. And it's like, it's just not funny. It's very ugly and lame and lazy. And I never liked this guy. And I do remember like being really bummed out seeing him the first time I saw this in the theater. And then I honestly thought he was playing himself for a moment, because they say he's like a comedian.
Yeah.
And then, but then he plays himself, and he's like playing himself as like kind of an asshole. And I was like, oh, I don't know if he's playing himself. At least he's willing to like do that. But then you find out it's not him because he does a different routine at the end. I will say the most unrealistic thing in the entire movie is when he gets up and starts doing stand up, and the whole train is just like cracking up at his jokes. They're horrible. Nothing he says is funny, and like everyone's like, ah. It's like, oh, come on.
You know what? It takes place in Chicago. They're just happy they're not getting shot. You know, like it's they got to take whatever they can get.
So no, I was not happy about Russell Peters. But before we go into spoilers, Chris, can I mention one more cast member, a very important one? Because there is a moment where we hear it's just a voice roll. We hear Coulter is the whole movie. He like wants to speak to his dad. He's like, "Does my dad know where I am? Does my dad know what's going on?" And spoiler alert, we finally get to a moment where he gets to talk to his dad on the phone. And it's the voice of the great Scott Bakula, who, of course, we all know as Captain Jonathan Archer on Star Trek Enterprise.
Wow. You had to do it. You had to do it. I you know what? I didn't actually know that was the Bax in that. But as I affectionately call him as a.
I will be honest. I didn't remember either until I saw the end credits. Because it's not like Scott Bakula has the most like distinctive, recognizable voice.
I think you only do this to me because you know that I have to put the music underneath.
Yeah, you gotta go get the Star Trek music.
I gotta go get the Star Trek music, and usually, listeners, I'm such a perfectionist. I'm gonna go get the Enterprise music. Oh, so here we are.
Which is very funny because I don't know if you know that's like the most controversial Star Trek theme of all time.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because it's the only Star Trek show that has like kind of a pop song as the theme.
Oh.
And like most Trek fans absolutely hate it. I actually kind of like it. It doesn't bother me.
Can you sing it for me right now?
No, I can't. But you can listen to it.
Damn it. Okay. Okay. Spoilers, everybody. Source Code. It's a banger of a film. Go watch it.
Yeah, if you haven't, definitely check it out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah,
especially if you're into like time travel movies. Oh, and we haven't even said this doesn't need to be a spoiler. We haven't even talked about Gyllenhaal's performance. This is let's just do that before we get into spoilers. I think we'll probably both say this is a much better showcase of what makes Gyllenhaal special than Prince of Persia.
Oh yeah,
he was just kind of like action man. That is here he gets to get like a much more full range. We get to see manic Jake Gyllenhaal. We get to see funny Jake Gyllenhaal, charming Jake Gyllenhaal. Like sexy Jake Gyllenhaal. It's all here, baby. Like this is a perfect. You get why Jake Gyllenhaal is attracted to this because he gets to do it all here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he's phenomenal in it. He does everything you want from an actor. Really. This one gets forgotten. Nobody talks about Source Code, but this is one of my absolute favorite Jake Gyllenhaal movies. He's so good in it. Yeah, I hope more people watch it or at least talk about it. Tell your friends.
It's so good. You're so good. You watch the movie and you're like, yeah, you go, Jake. You kill off that teacher and take over his life. What'd that guy ever do? I'm sure he doesn't. He's no Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah. Well, everybody's got demons nowadays. He might have deserved it. Okay. The real big spoilers. Okay. There's a lot I want to talk about, but the moment when you realize, or you're told that Coulter Stevens on paper is killed in action, and they recovered his body and placed it in this experiment, and Coulter is talking to Goodwin and everybody through like his brain patterns to like text on a screen because he is a torso who is basically brain dead, except for this source code basically keeping him alive. I'm getting goosebumps. It is absolutely horrifying.
That was the one visual I had a distinct memory of. I don't know if you did too.
Yes,
the
it sticks with you.
Yeah, the moment where where the camera goes above and you see that actually, because like they do a nice job. At first, you see the pod that he's in, and first you see the pod that he visualizes, and you think, okay, is that really it?
Yeah.
And you see, no, he's like a body in a box. But then you think it's okay. Is it a full body? And then when the camera pans up and you see that he's just a torso, and the top of his head is kind of missing, and the wires are running right into his brain.
Yeah.
Man, yeah.
And this is happening while Trev already talked about how he gets to call his dad in this timeline because now he's realized that he's everybody in his life thinks he's dead, right? So he obviously had unfinished business with his father, and this is apparently 2 months later after he was KIA. So he calls his dad through his cell phone and pretends to be a guy that was with Coulter when he died. and basically just gets to tell his dad a couple of things, very, very simple, very, very meaningful. And it's cross-cutting between seeing him in that box. And it's really sad, it's really horrifying, but it's like it's got this like beautiful hopefulness, because he's making amends with his dad and hearing that his dad is like, all that shit didn't matter kind of thing, right? And it's done in very few words. The movie doesn't seem to slow down for it either. You know what I mean? Like, the editing is so on point that it doesn't bog it down and it doesn't feel cheap. It's very much an earned moment for Coulter to get this. That was definitely a moment that I got emotional. The biggest moment that I got emotional, though, that I genuinely started to kind of to tear up, was so Coulter thwarts the threat. They get the guy through his clues and they figure it out, and they figure out who it was that did the bombing on the train. So back in the real world, he tells Colleen Goodwin and tells Dr. Rutledge that this is who it is, this is his license plate, yada yada, go get him. And in the real world, they get him like right away. It's very well done, because as soon as he knows who it is, they know who it is, the FBI get him, and then the plan is thwarted and there's no bomb that goes up in downtown Chicago. Now, Jake has feelings of, I think I can save these people, right? He thinks that there's more to this. I'm not just flying back into somebody's memory. He's like, I think I can change something. And he tells Goodwin that he needs to just give me my dying wish. Pull the plug on me, let me die, but give me 8 minutes and let me go save the world. And Vera Farmiga says she's going to do it. She's going to go against her mission and help him go back into source code to do what he needs to do. And Jake straps himself back in and he looks at her and goes, I'm going to save her, Goodwin. And it's like, he believes he's going to succeed.
Yeah.
And it is, he's almost giddy about it.
What's also really important about this moment too, and this is what I realized too after the fact, thinking about it, is we've been talking and lightly joking about the fact that he essentially, when this timeline takes over now, he essentially murders Sean Fentress and takes his life, right?
yeah, for sure.
But I think why it works is because when I watch the movie, I 100% think that he does not think that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. He believes that he does believe he can save everyone. He believes he can start a new timeline and, actually thwart the initial bombing. But I think in his mind, because he says to Michelle Monaghan, after he's already thwarted the bombing, he says to her, what would you do with only 1 minute left in your life? I think in Jake Gyllenhaal's mind, he believes that he's going to hit a certain time and he's going to turn off and Sean Fentress is going to take back over.
Yeah.
Because he almost seems surprised when the timeline keeps going and he's still there. And so that's why I think it works, is because even though there's no denying that he does take over this person's life, I don't believe that was his intent. And instead, the movie's kind of saying it's almost like a reward for him for doing the right thing. And he's kind of like, oh my God, I actually do get to live this new life, and I get to go on. So,
well, and then all these sci-fi concepts start to smack you in the face. This is what's so brilliant about this film, is that like it's such an emotional, cathartic moment to see him, cuff Derek Frost, take all his shit, call the cops on him, go right back to his seat, make sure everybody's having a good time, call his dad, go back to Michelle Monaghan, have a moment. And then all of a sudden, he doesn't die. And he doesn't revert back to real life. So it confirms that there is, multiverses, parallel realities.
Take that, Marvel. Source Code is doing new timelines and multiverse before you were even thinking about it.
Yes, and doing it with actual heart and emotion. Interesting. Instead of just cameos.
Meanwhile, back in the prime timeline, Vera Farmiga is getting like arrested.
Yeah, exactly.
Like discharged. And,
Well, it's like this movie now is about like experimental physics too, and like artificial consciousness. Like it's got all these heady things that you can sit and think about and go cross-eyed on. But that's what I love so much about this kind of sci-fi. It throws concepts at you and uses it in the in the manner to get you to have an emotional reaction to characters. It's kind of the reason why the 2013 film Gravity, I have firmly placed it in my top 10 now. Gravity to me is just an absolute emotional, cathartic film.
Yeah.
It's a movie about grief. It's a movie about depression. It's a movie about the resilience of the human body and the human brain in the face of absolute death and destruction and cataclysmic, just chaos. But it's about her getting over not getting over, but her dealing with the death of her daughter. And that's why Gravity is a masterpiece.
I mean, I'm with you. I wouldn't put it in my top 10, but I've watched it multiple times, and there's never been a time where, I don't want to spoil the end, but those final 30 seconds, that
Incredible.
music swelling and the imagery, there's just no way not to have that strike you in the feels.
And I think this movie does that for me, not on the level of Gravity. Gravity's something else, but this one, it hits that feeling with me because I'm a guy that wears my heart on my sleeve. Like Trev knows this. We get in arguments a lot, and that's because I do that. And I think it's about the emotions and the journey in this film that Mr. Rule Guy, as our long-term listeners know, I don't give a shit about the rules of this film. And if you can win me over on that level, I think you really have a real piece of art, truly.
Well, the movie ends on such this intriguing idea now too, right? And this it's we see we're in the new timeline. He is now Sean Fentress. He and Michelle Monaghan are go to the park together and realize they are starting this relationship. And then we see that he earlier on, we talked about that, the last loop kind of plays with Nolan time a little bit. It's a lot longer than 8 minutes. And within that 8-minute loop, he sent a text message to Colleen Goodwin. And because she is, the whole thing with the Coulter going into the source code to stop this bombing is not going to happen in this timeline. So instead, the next day, she gets an email telling her, if you're getting this email, it means that in one timeline, there was this bombing. You helped me stop it. But I have actually, I've prevented it now. But that means I'm still there with you. I'm still in this pod. My torso is still sitting in this pod. And at some point, you're going to set me into some kind of source code. Just please help me. So it's wow, you realize he's living in the same timeline that he himself is in as a torso in this pod. It's just oh my God, this is so mind-bending now. Because there's two Coulter Stevens in this timeline.
And you know what I love so much about that, too, is that this gives Jake's character complete autonomy over his body, his choices, not Sean's choices, but Coulter's choices. And he makes the decision to set off a chain reaction that, hey, let's thwart the next gigantic issue, and then let's keep telling them and keep going and keep going. And then basically Coulter Stevens, that's his destiny. That's in every timeline. He's
like, I'm not going to stop until I've taken over the body of everybody on Earth.
He starts requesting certain tragedies to happen with Hollywood celebs.
That's the dark way to look at it. This is actually the prequel to that movie, The One, with Jet Li and Jason Statham.
Yeah, at the end, there's a bunch of half torso Jake Gyllenhaals showing up to fight on a big pyramid.
What would you have thought if the very end of the movie was exactly as it is now, right? But then the camera pans down. Vera Farmiga walks into the room. She's reading the email, and she goes to the pod and she looks in and she looks down at the torso of Coulter Stevens, and suddenly it wakes up and it goes, "What's going on? I'm Sean Fentress. What am I doing in here?"
In perpetual pain and suffering. Oh my God! It becomes a body swap. Oh my God! Like that. Oh. That would be a darker tone.
Yeah, it would have worked, right? It could have still that would have worked as an ending if you wanted a Twilight Zone ending. But I do want to ask you now, and this can lead into finally our discussion about this.
Sure.
I agree with you that the ending just really it's an emotional swell. It's perfect in the construction of it. Mm-hmm. Did it feel? Because knowing what you know now, did it feel like sequel bait at the end to you? Because there was an element to me that was thinking, okay, we know that this wasn't intended to ever be a franchise starter. That came later. But then I was thinking oh, you know what? Actually, there is room there for sequels. Now, we can talk more about in a second what we think the sequel would have been or what they probably would have done. But they do leave the breadcrumbs there for a continuation right from this.
Yeah, I agree. I think there it even comes sooner than that. At an hour and 5 minutes or an hour and 6 minutes, when it's proven that source code works, Dr. Rutledge crosses your screen saying, "We finally have a tool against the war on terror." And that to me felt, okay, this is setting up this mission again and again and again. It kind of is rife for it, even if Ben Ripley meant it or not. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like in the back of his brain, there was something like, if this hits, let me do just a pinch of franchise bait, And I think it happens there, and especially at the end when the voiceover comes and he talks directly to Goodwin, saying, "Help me, let's do it again." And why not? That's the thing. I'm really. It sounds like Duncan Jones wasn't going to come back no matter what. When they did actually start talking about a sequel, Duncan Jones was in the middle of Warcraft, so he was out.
This was 2014, we should say.
2014, sorry, yeah. And Ben Ripley was coming back to write it, and Jake Gyllenhaal it was very unclear if he was going to come back. I'm almost glad it didn't happen because Duncan Jones couldn't do it. And Jake couldn't be back in a weird way. Like, do you want to see more? Do you want to see more of Coulter Stevens, or do you want this to be like flash forward to 50 years in the future, and all of a sudden source code is franchised itself, kind of like our idea about Ghostbusters.
That's why I want to talk about this, because like I said, I do think with how the movie ends. Yeah, there actually is potential there for a sequel where you realize we're getting another adventure Coulter Stevens, and you can actually get into like what we just said. Like, here's the problem: is like now you'd be kind of like, oh my god, another like alternate timeline multiverse movie. But there is the potential for that to be like catching up with is him in this other person's body, but then his other consciousness still in this timeline, and discovering that this is going to set up another timeline. There's a lot you could do with that.
Oh yeah.
But what I honestly believe, I think this seems to me almost surely that they would have went the lazier route and said, well, source code 2 is about a new soldier that's put into the same kind of thing, put into source code, and we just do the time loop thing again with a different character.
Yes.
Like, it would have just been more of the same with a different character. They did have a director signed. They had, I don't know if you saw that, interestingly enough, they had Anna Forster signed, who directed Underworld Blood Wars.
Yeah, right.
But was also the cinematographer on Day After Tomorrow. So I don't know if that was like a Jake Gyllenhaal connection or not. But
interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it's weird because I'm kind of with you, is that I don't know if I want to see source code 2 if it's just another character going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Because we've had it. But there's a part that's kind of compelled by the idea of seeing, the next step and really expanding the mythology of what you could do with the Jake Gyllenhaal character.
Yeah, I like that a lot more. I like the idea of, him now as Sean in this new timeline also being like, oh, my body is somewhere else. And, maybe now he needs to get to his body or something like that. And then he himself seeing his, half torso in that lab is an interesting visual that I feel like, man, that in itself, if we can just expand on that. Or,
well, it doesn't even need to be that, right? Couldn't it be something where, you pick up, so in this timeline, some other disaster happens and they put Coulter Stevens into source code to go stop it. But so now we're with Coulter Stevens again, right? A new one who has no memory of the events of the first film. He's instead just in source code. He's taking over someone else's body. And in his time loop, he actually somehow engages with Sean Fentress.
Oh, yeah.
But Sean Fentress is actually him, yeah.
Oh, yes. Now we're getting into enemy territory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And again, or Sean is a military teacher. And he teaches himself. I don't know. Yeah, there's so many interesting ways to do this when you're playing with... it's interesting, Trev. There's a bunch of movies out here talking about multiverses lately, and some of the most high-profile ones whiffed on how interesting that concept is. Mm-hmm. And it is really amazing that you get a movie like this that I walk out of that being like, oh my God, give me more parallel universes. Give me more Jake Gyllenhaal fighting crime or whatever. It's rife for just interesting territory, thought-provoking conversations. And then there's the biggest studios on the planet that make a multiverse where red means go and green means stop.
And pizza comes in balls. Don't forget about that.
Right, the pizza balls. this movie was truly forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, like, ultimately, just to be clear, though, like, I'm intrigued by a lot of those ideas. Ultimately, I'm just glad there's no sequel, because not everything needs a sequel. So it is kind of nice that this is just a singular, cool time travel movie. And honestly, as we said, without continuing the story, you don't have to run the risk of maybe all these ethical concerns we raised. Maybe that would get even worse in a sequel, you know, because maybe maybe they would like really drop the ball on how that's handled.
Right.
So where it ends is probably the right place for the story to end. But I was just kind of surprised watching it, because I went into the second viewing knowing that we were going to talk about how this was never intended to be a franchise starter, but then years later they decided to try. And I was watching the entire movie thinking to myself, that's going to be the case, right? It's going to have such a concrete ending. And then it came to the ending and I was like, oh no, yeah, they were actually kind of right on this one. There is potential here. So.
Definitely. You know who really interests me is Ben Ripley. It's amazing. Like I said, the last thing he really did was that Flatliners remake. So he kind of jumped back into the horror punch-up scripts and that sort of thing.
It's kind of sad because you read that quote earlier, and I just want to read one more part of that quote again, where he said, one thing that really kept me going through writing Source Code was that I had a suspicion that if I got this right, it could really open up a new level for my writing career. And then since then, he's written 2 movies.
Yeah.
One, a movie called Boy Choir, which basically does not exist, and then the Flatliners remake.
It's strange because, 2 years ago, you saw this too, eh? Netflix, well, they greenlight everything, number one, but they picked up another spec script from him called Parallel, and it was almost like a spiritual sequel, maybe, to Source Code, but it was like a sci-fi heist movie across parallel universes. Again, if Ben Ripley's writing that, I'd watch that for sure. I think he's got something. I think he's a great idea man. And
so does this mean you're going to go watch Species 3 and 4?
Don't test me.
I've seen 1 and 2. You know what? I've seen the non Ben Ripley Species movies, but then I stopped. I guess
that's actually shocking.
I guess maybe I owe it to the man to finish off the series.
Yeah. Have you seen the Flatliners remake?
No, it looked like so. I love Flatliners. I love the original.
Yeah.
The remake just looked like very unnecessary to me, and I didn't hear anything good about it. So,
well, this is the thing, right? Ben Ripley's obviously a talent, but so is Jake Gyllenhaal, Duncan Jones, Michelle Monaghan, Vera Farmiga, Jeffrey Wright, Scott Bakula. and you put all of those ingredients together and you do get a source code. So going back to when you say you're glad this was a one and done, I agree. Like, as much as part of me is like, oh, I'd watch further adventures. Sometimes the secret sauce is the secret sauce, and if Duncan Jones isn't part of Source Code 2, well, I did see Underworld Blood Wars. So I don't want to say I know how that's going to go, but Duncan Jones has quite an eye for visual storytelling, and I think it really worked in this one. It was just it was like a perfect blend on this one. Yeah, no, this is like, honestly, I'm glad we did this one, even though, we had to come up with a way to like justify it for ourselves, which I think we did. But this is another one of this is one of the better movies we've done. This is a banger. And it's interesting to talk about the idea of how sometimes movies are so good that you understand why people are like, I want more of that. I know from Hollywood, it's just about profitability. That's why they want more. But yeah, this is the kind of movie that you kind of get why people would be like, there's probably still room to explore there, right? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's all I got to say about Source Code. I think it's great. Yeah.
You gonna wait another 12 years to watch it again, or?
I might actually track down the Blu-ray.
Yeah,
that's what I would do. This feels like something that I should own.
It has a commentary by Jones, Gyllenhaal, and Ripley, so that might be pretty interesting to listen to.
Oh, interesting. Then you know what? Honestly, I will most likely, definitely try to seek it out for sure, especially before physical media dies.
Completely goes away. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been, this, me and you have been talking about this a lot, but I've definitely gotten back into picking up things, like not that I ever stopped, but I've been, a couple weeks ago I picked up Tremors 1 to 4.
Yeah.
And I was like, why not? Why not pick up those movies and have them for me forever?
No, yeah. There are certain things which I specifically for the last couple of years wasn't getting because I was like, whatever, they're on streaming services. And in recent months, I've realized that that's not always going to be the case. So
nope.
Suddenly, I like to go back to Star Trek for a second. Suddenly, with recent Paramount Plus kind of news, I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should pick up the Blu-rays of the Star Trek stuff I like on there, because it might not always be there. So
Exactly. Okay, so Jake Gyllenhaal was an interesting month. Like I said, go listen back to Prince of Persia, and then I was about to say, and then this one. Okay, I'm losing it, people.
yeah, listen to this again. Oh my God, it's like a time loop.
Nice.
Just suddenly just wake up and listen to this all over again.
But we are back to our regularly scheduled programming with Summer Surprise, where a online generator randomizes our films, and kind of basically we pick them out of a hat. And the next movie, August 1st, we are looking at Surf Ninjas from 1993.
Which I'm sure is just as good as source code. So
yes.
I'm sure the quality keeps on coming.
Same year as Jurassic Park, so maybe. August 15th, timely, The Haunted Mansion from 2003, the Eddie Murphy version. We have a new one popping up this summer, or late summer, so that'll be kind of interesting. Maybe we might try to get out to see that other one, and maybe we can compare. Or we'll wait 3 years and have to review the other Haunted Mansion, because it probably is going to fail, judging the way that this summer is going in the box office. And then capping off Summer Surprise on August 29th, we are looking at Artemis Fowl from 2020, which, listeners, I think is going to be a very, very interesting conversation. So if you're thinking on skipping out on Artemis Fowl, please don't. I think we cooked up something interesting for you on that one. So, yeah, follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2 F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be awesome. And then join the tribe and hit that subscribe and follow along with us through Summer Surprise Part 3. 3 years. By August 1st. By August, we'll be doing this for 3 years. You know that?
I know, that's insane.
You sounded so happy. Let's do it again. Let's go on a loop. Do it again. Another 3.
Speaking of, you know what's bizarre? Just now, for the first time, I'm realizing we just did 2 Jake Gyllenhaal time travel movies. I entirely missed me that Prince of Persia is also a time travel movie.
See, this is why you don't listen to me, because I told you that during our Prince of Persia recording. So,
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, can I just quickly read you some of the Letterboxd reviews for Source Code? I don't know if you took a look at them.
Go on. I love when you read these to me.
Okay, I picked some good ones. Okay. Groundhog Day, but with a lead you want to fuck. There's a bit at the start where Jake Gyllenhaal goes into the bathroom and looks in the mirror, and he's got some other guy's face, and that must be the most disappointed anyone's ever felt. Imagine looking like Jake Gyllenhaal, then suddenly not looking like Jake Gyllenhaal, just looking like some guy. Jake Gyllenhaal angrily yelled, "Try me," in this movie, and I jizzed in my pants.
Oh, okay.
Roses are red, violets are blue. Smash me, Jake Gyllenhaal. And then this is my favorite
Wait, hold
one.
on. That didn't rhyme. It was terrible.
I know. This is my favorite one. Jake Gyllenhaal, more like Jake, fuck me in that bathroom hall. The people watching Source Code are some of the thirstiest MFers out there, man.
Oh, yeah. You know what's weird about Letterboxd? Like, I love Letterboxd, right? I was an early adopter for Letterboxd. I've always had a, but there is in recent years, people have really tried to memify their reviews. Am I wrong?
Some do. That's definitely some people's shtick. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I'm guilty for it too. I have been for sure, but I always find it weird when people announce how horny they are through a diary entry for a movie they watched.